here at the Sea of Galilee, and behind me you can see that it is almost sunset, and I've got a word for you from the time of Jesus' ministry on the Sea of Galilee. In Matthew chapter 14 we have the miracle of Jesus walking on the water, and to kind of give us a feel of the context, Jesus finds out that John the Baptist, his cousin, has been executed, and he takes his disciples and they're going to a desolate place, which would be off to my right, that they would have been trying to go to a desolate place. Well, the crowds that follow Jesus have heard where Jesus was going, he and his disciples, and so they actually ran along the land as the boat was traveling, and so they got to the place where Jesus and his disciples were going by the time that Jesus got there. And then we have the miracle of the feeding of the 5,000, because Jesus taught to them and it got time for them to eat. The disciples wanted to send them away, but Jesus said, no, feed them. And so they have the miraculous feeding. And then Jesus sends his disciples on the boat on the Sea of Galilee, and he stays at the desolate place, dismissing his the crowds that were with him there. And then we pick up the story here in Matthew chapter 14, verse 22. It says, immediately he made the disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side, while he dismissed the crowds. And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, there he was alone, but the boat by this time was a long way from the land, beaten by the waves, for the wind was great against them. And in the fourth watch of the night he came to them walking on the sea. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified and said, it is a ghost. And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, take heart, it is I, do not be afraid. And Peter answered him, Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water. He said, come. But Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came to Jesus. But when he saw the winds, he was afraid and began to sink and cried out, Lord, save me. Jesus immediately reached out his hand and took hold of him, saying to him, O you of little faith, why did you doubt? And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshipped him, saying, truly, you are the Son of God. Now, when we look at this story, there's some things that we really want to pay attention to. Is Jesus is walking on the water. Obviously, this is a miracle, but if we just look there, we miss the first miracle, in that Jesus was on shore. He was up on the mountain. He was praying by himself, and a long ways off through the storm, he saw that his disciples were in trouble. And so we know that that must be a miracle. No man could really be able to do that. And so he comes to his disciples there on the water, and Mark's account says that he meant to pass them by. Now, that doesn't mean that he was just going to walk onto the other side, but that meant that he wanted to be seen by the disciples, and he wanted them to know that he was there with them. And when they see him, they begin to be very, very afraid. And he says, take courage. And then literally the words in the Greek are, I am. Now, we know this to be the name of God himself, and so he says, I am, declaring that he is God. Take courage, God is near. And it is really, I guess, understood that the disciples should see what Jesus is doing and understand that he is certainly the divine, that he is certainly God. It says that the divine is going to be the master of the sea. The God of Israel trampled the waves of the sea in Job chapter 9, verse 8, and makes a way in the sea, a path in the mighty waters. The Old Testament had foretold that the divine would have power and would have command over the waters. And if he is in command of the waters, then certainly he is the creator of those very same waters. Now, to say that Peter walked on the water, that may be a bit of an exaggeration. The language indicates that he began to walk on the water, that he took a step out. Obviously, it was a step of faith for a sailor, a fisherman, to leave a boat that was still seaworthy in favor of troubled seas. But he stepped out, and then the wind and the waves, they scared him. They made him concerned, and he began to sink, but crying out, "Lord, save me," the cry that we should all make at some point in our lives. And immediately Jesus saved him. And then another miracle that we see as Jesus and Peter step back into the boat, that immediately the storm is calmed, and Jesus obviously had the power to calm that storm. And when he was with his disciples, they worshiped Jesus. Now the word there, worship, literally means to fall face down. They fell prostrate at Jesus' feet. Now this obviously is worship. This is not, and many of the Bible stories end with the disciples praising him and being in awe of him, but this is different. They are bowing down before Jesus, and they say, truly, this is the Son of God. There's no other way to understand what they were saying than the fact that they really believed that Jesus was God. Now, here's the reality. If Jesus had have meant for them to have believed something else, this would have been the time that he would have told them, no, I'm not God. Rather, I'm just a teacher. I'm just a rabbi or something else. But Jesus did not deny this claim. He really is God. So what do we take away from a passage like this? Do we believe that Jesus walked on the water, or do we stand with the skeptics and say that no, this was made up to give us faith that Jesus would be with us in any storm? I think that we take the Bible literally, that we believe that Jesus really did walk on the water, that Peter certainly stepped out of the boat, and for a moment he was able to stand on faith even when there was no ground underneath him. But a principle I think sometimes we forget. The reality is Jesus made another promise. In Matthew chapter 28, he said, "And I will be with you even to the end of the age." Now, Jesus' disciples were not aware that Jesus was with them, that he was watching over him. They did not know that he was fixing to rescue them. They thought that they were going to perish. And then they saw what they thought was a man walking on the water, but they said, "This must be a ghost." They were afraid. They did not realize that Jesus was already fulfilling a promise that he would make later. He was with them always, even to the end of the age. This is something that we have to remember, is that Jesus will always, always be with us. So from day 2 in Israel, I thank you for your time.